Responsive images and responsive design. Let's step back a little bit and kind of refresh what responsive design is. It basically allows, it's a kind of a set of techniques that allows you to respond or kind of reflect the device user is using, right? Um, Adapting your content to fit that device the best way. The most common case is obviously layout, right? And that date on the bottom, May 25th, 2010, is when the idea first came around with a few basic blocks. With that post Ethan Marcotti wrote about responsive web design, right? Those were necessary blocks to make this happen. But responsiveness is not only about layout, it's about responding to everything, right? For example, touch events versus JavaScript, versus click and mouse pointers, and support for this technology or that technology. The goal, again, is to make sure that your website works perfectly, and I mean that perfectly, on every device, right? One thing that I can say is that this idea took the world with fire. It spread so fast, it's just crazy. I think it did Web 2.0. I think HTML5 wasn't even like on par with it. This is a killer. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, trust me, this one eats your budget like hell. Every business person out there, maybe you can compare that to social media in terms of how much budget is spent on it. But this is the one that will, if you're not doing responsive design yet, trust me, you will in a couple of years, and it will consume your whole team into awesome technology, right? And I think the reason behind it is that it was very timely, right? Mobile devices started to show up. Well, I guess we are not on TVs yet, right? I think that was a little bit of a optimistic projection, but mobile devices are all over the place. Desktops are everywhere, and another thing is that browsers became kind of good to be able to accommodate that, right? Well, today we're going to talk about responsiveness that applies to images specifically, because we can talk about responsive design forever. There are conferences about it and stuff. Today we're going to talk about images. And a few ways that images can be responsive are responsive to size. That's the most obvious one. The bigger the monitor is, the bigger the image is, right? Art direction. I'll say a couple of words about it. Then formats and encoding. Different devices have different capabilities. Why not to use that? And bandwidth is another one. I'll say quite a few words about each one. So first one, size in pixels. I mean, that desktop is 1920 pixels wide, while that phone is 320 pixels wide, right? The difference is ginormous. It's what, 6 times, right? Or something like that. And we still need to show our website. It's a challenge, right? And we're not going to talk about CSS challenge, the layout challenge, the JavaScript challenge to make it happen. Well, guys who developed it will tell you everything about what the challenge it was, but we're just about images. Clearly, the more pixels you have, the bigger the images will be. And obvious problem with that, when you kind of look at it this way, is that why do we need the same image that is many kilobytes to serve monitor on the left to be loaded and monitor on the right? It just doesn't make sense. If width is 6 times smaller, then overall size of the image will be what, like 20 times smaller that you actually need to show on this monitor. So basically, all I'm asking you to think about, how is the wire that is, well, actually the phone doesn't have a wire, right? But we still say on the wire. But that connection between the source and destination does it really need to be loaded with all of those bytes to represent the website on every device, right? And once you think about it, it kind of becomes obvious that no, it doesn't. And I think that's the core of the first uh, kind of most important piece of responsive images. Make them fit the screen and make them as close to the screen resolution, destination screen resolution as possible. Tim Kudlik, who actually worked with us on this project, and also, how many of you attended his presentations in summer about responsive design? Some of you. Okay, so he actually after that he wrote a couple posts, kind of in detail describing the problem. And first one was primarily about making those images fit the wire you have or fit the connection you have. But the second one was also concentrated on how much memory does the browser consume to render those images, right? And the core of the issue is that when you have a huge image and you want to condense it to fit in a smaller pixel destination screen, CPU or GPU or whatever processor of that device needs to do a lot of work. And at the same time, to do that work, both images, the source image and the destination image, need to occupy some memory. And that's not your JPEG compressed memory, right? Like 140K of JPEG or whatever, or 10K for JPEG. It's your bitmap memory, right? It needs to be rendered into bitmap, then scaled down. And and that's a lot of memory to occupy. And when you're talking about that iMac on the left, it's kind of not the biggest problem in the world. Good connection, lots of memory, best CPU. I mean, if you bought it recently at least, it's not a problem. The phone, though, is a very different story. You are out of battery very quickly. Your phone just cannot handle that optimization fast enough, and it's a big problem. So especially if you are into interfaces where interaction with the interface is important. And frankly, with touch UI, you always are in that situation. You have a problem of your computer in your hand is freezing while image is rendered. I highly recommend reading those two articles. I hope to post links into the slides, or just go search for Tim's blog and you will find them. So both wait on the wire and wait in memory plus time to actually decode that content is a big issue when you're trying to fit huge image into a small screen. I forgot to mention that obviously the small image on the big screen will be distorted. I think that's kind of beyond our conversation here. Although same issues still apply for decoding and memory stuff because, well, decoded increased image, the stretched image still needs to occupy memory, just the other way around. Well, if you thought that's it about those problems, here's another one. Apparently, just when responsive design started to take off, Apple volunteered every hardware manufacturer into new game of saying we have even more of whatever they have there. I mean, first it was CPU, screen size, pixel, I mean, inches and stuff like that. Now it's density of pixels. So what it means is just simple. We have more pixels in the same space. And I'm kind of gonna skip the CSS component of it and things like that. But for images, it's very clear. Your images can be bigger, and try to convince your marketing person to think otherwise, right? It's not easy. So Kindle Fire, I think it's a 9-inch device. I didn't have that many pixels imaginable in my mind when I started web development. This was not possible, you know. I think it was 600 by 480, right, at the moment. And well, some people had 800. That was huge. We had sidebars created for those. It's awesome, right? But this amount of pixels, frankly, I think it's too many. But you know, I think we are reaching the point when it's just you're kind of running out of return on this investment. But the worst part for us, even though those people buy those devices because they think the more pixels, the better, the worst part for us is that, well, pixels are maybe hard to put more into that inches technology thingy, but wires or wireless is not increasing sixfold or whatever, tenfold or whatever. And definitely CPUs of those devices and batteries are not in, increasing in that at the same speed. So rendering and consuming those images is not getting easier, right? So we were volunteered to provide worse experience to our users, except for maybe test cases in your office when your boss can see that your site is awesome, right? I mean, it's great for some products. It's probably going to be amazing look and feel when you can see every tiny detail of a picture, right? But at this point, I urge you to consider the benefit that you get out of it. From image optimization perspective, you don't need density or inches, anything. Just count how many pixels you need to show and get from there, right? Um, so this is about size. I think it's one of the most critical pieces of responsive images, responding to the size of the screen. Again, we're not talking about layout issues and how creative our creative teams would be about composing the product on that screen at the higher resolutions when you can fit a lot. Just from image perspective, more pixels, more data means slower. Uh, it's kind of a shortcut, but I think it explains the situation. By the way, that Wikipedia link apparently has a list of devices with how big is the density. Some devices are actually at 3x already. I think it's a big achievement. You have a lot of data in a small screen you cannot see. So be careful with that. Art direction. It's not really related to performance, but it's often mentioned along with responsive images, and I thought I would mention it, and especially because there is some implementation complication that comes with it. So the idea is very simple, that instead of scaling down the image proportionally to the size of the screen, like this image on the bottom, you see it's kind of just squished a little bit. We're trying to recrop it or reframe it, I believe is the official term, and emphasize the most important piece of the image. Apparently, it's this chihuahua and not that piece of furniture it sits on, but in this particular case. But kind of, if the screen is smaller and we have a less real estate to show the content, maybe we want to emphasize the most important part more. And that allows us to show just the face of Chihuahua. Hopefully that's the most important part here, to people who can barely see it on a small phone, while we have a whole luxury of showing the setting which Chihuahua is in on the bigger screens, right? The challenge here is primarily basically the flow, the process. Imagine how much more content needs to be created manually, right, by editors. Hopefully, you just have one version of one other variation of an image, but sometimes you might have more. Again, once we go to TVs with all of this, I think game will be even funnier. But some cases it's actually more problematic. For example, you're not having editorial content that your editors submitted. It might be user-generated content. Think photos on Facebook, right? How do you crop automatically on Facebook? Well, Facebook actually is about faces. They have some face recognition stuff that works. I'm not sure about Chihuahuas, right? For blogs about Chihuahuas or about office furniture or whatever, it might not work out that well. You can still use some of the techniques to automate that, but generally it is bigger problem. And we're not going to go into how it's done. We actually didn't implement this to the great applause of our designers or photo editors who had to create more images. So we actually ended up not using art direction route. The next is one issue that is we can respond to is the way the images are encoded, right? Uh, Different devices support different formats, but more importantly, all devices support JPEG. But what is the quality we need the image in? And that's funny enough, and I will show you some information at the end. This is one of the most important ones. Um, Optimizing for JPEG quality is one of the most important things before you even think of responsiveness. If you're not familiar with JPEG and how it works, essentially you have a quality setting from 1 to 100. It's not a percentage really, that percentage is a little misleading, but um, uh, basically image can be different quality along the spectrum of the best and the worst. Uh, while for different images, the biggest challenge is that for different images, this perfect setting is different. So for a photo, you can go much lower, generally speaking, than for a logo, for example, right? Um, Same applies to some photos with a lot of detail, some tiny lines and things like that, where you just cannot go as low as possible as you can on regular photo. And it goes without saying that the lower the quality setting is, the smaller file is, right? That's why we are doing it. So one of the challenges that remained for quite a while was how to pick it automatically. Because if we ask our designers to go into Photoshop and pick the proper setting every time, it works amazingly for about 15 minutes. After that, they are busy with actually making photos, cropping them, and actually producing them, and forget completely. And trust me, this is, I talk from experience, right? We created video training, we provided courses on how to do that. It just doesn't work. So we want to automate that. And some time ago, the company called Jpeg Mini emerged in the market from a different side of the business. Basically, they tried to save designers and photographers space on their disk drives. And they actually invested a lot into automating the resizing of the images. There are a few other projects around there. Some of them are software as a service. There is some open source that is not being maintained very well. But essentially, they pick the right setting, right? They pick the right quality setting and they recompress your JPEG at the right level. Again, when I say right, it's a great sales pitch for this company, probably, but you should not trust me on my word. Apply it to your images. If you do a lot of architectural drawing, it might not work. Um, but if you do a lot of photography and rich content like truTV does, it probably will work pretty well. Well, it actually does. And that's about lossy compression, right? Making your images as small as it needs to be, right? As low quality as it needs to be. Every setting lower will reduce the file size, and as we discussed, file on the wire or in memory. Well, in memory, actually, that's a problem. In memory, you cannot help much because pixel size is what matters. But the file size on the wire will differ dramatically. But there is also another type of compression. It's called lossless compression. Basically, there is a lot of metadata in your files, in your source files usually, and whatever it's JPEG or not, it's worth trimming unnecessary stuff. And there are a few tools. It was called, one of the first ones was called Smoosh It in the past, but now I think ImageOptim is one of the most favored ones. I believe it's a desktop for Mac, but then maybe there is a command line tool as well. I forgot. But essentially, it will go remove all metadata that is not necessary, like thumbnails that are often embedded in JPEGs, or some color palettes, or some copyright information. By the way, you should probably keep it if you actually need it, but most of the time we don't need it. We just need to display the image. And it will recompress the image and make it smaller, right? So again, these kind of tools is something you want to use in your process. Now, we talked about JPEG because it's the most popular format for the heaviest images on the internet, right? Photography and stuff like that. But there are other formats out there. PNG is the other very popular format for for kind of less photo I don't know how to describe it. Not as photographic images, more of a drawings and stuff. GIF is the older one, and um, there are a few things you might want to do with it. First of all, pick the right one, right format. PNG is not very good for photos. Tell your image creators that maybe they shouldn't use PNG. Might be the fastest technological solution for you. Just tell them. Often saving in the right format sticks with people pretty well. But you can change that to be automated. If the PNG is bigger than JPEG, well, convert it to JPEG. Uh, GIFs usually better in PNG, right? There is no reason for GIFs except for animation, and even that now is getting available as part of WebP, right? But if it's like regular GIF, usually that they were used for transparency, definitely convert it to PNG. I mean, it's the most effective way. For small icons, we probably can talk about spriting one day, but conversion from format to format, especially if you can automate it, is probably pretty effective way to solve some of the problems. Depending on your flow, right? You might get different problems coming in your door. We do have some editors making screenshots from HDTV quality videos in PNG, and the image that would be 100K becomes 1.5 megabyte, right? Not something you really want to do. Let's talk a little bit about two other formats called WebP and Jpeg XR. WebP is probably more popular because Google advertised it quite effectively. It's a new format that Google proposed as an alternative to JPEG. It actually has some benefits over PNG and GIFs and stuff like that. And over time, new versions actually incorporate better transparency. I think transparency was actually in the very early versions, but it incorporates animation and whole lot other things. And as sales pitch goes, about 20 to 30% smaller than JPEGs. Well, you need to test it in your images, definitely, but it can be smaller. The gotcha is, well, available in Chrome and Opera in particular versions. And by the way, WebP was available in the earlier versions of Chrome, but support wasn't as good, right? At least not all the features were available. Same thing goes for JPEG XR. It's Microsoft alternative, or at least alternative that was advertised by Microsoft a lot to JPEG. It's kind of a new version of JPEG. And it is available in IE10 and up. So together, WebP and JPEG XR kind of get there in terms of quality. I'm sorry, in terms of quantity, in terms of market share. So you might want to look at that. The trouble again is only particular browsers, so you probably need some real-time automation tooling to pick the right format. I have no clue about any of that. I actually stole all this information from that article by one of the Akamai developers that was posted, who worked on their FEO product, that was posted on Perf Planet calendar. By the way, Perf Planet runs Advent calendar every year. Awesome collection of articles. So you should check it out. There is one going on right now. And this is one of the articles that was there. Very detailed, very informative. I highly recommend it. So essentially, think about the right format. How do you transcode your images into the right format? It can benefit you dramatically. Okay. And last kind of piece of responsiveness that we can do that primarily came from the idea of adjusting to the network, right? It played a lot in the video, right? Well, some of you might know about a variable bitrate encoding of videos, right? Where depending on the quality and speed of the network, the quality of video will be reduced or increased, so you don't get interruptions and buffering. For images, interruptions and buffering is not as critical because just sheer volume of data is smaller, but speed of initial load clearly is the case. The trouble is, it's pretty complicated to do. You know, when we're talking about lots of data in videos and real-time stuff, it's real-time download of that data. that kind of makes sense to do this optimization. For images, it might be just hard. And there is an alternative. You can use progressive JPEGs. Patrick Meenan wrote a good article about progressive JPEGs, and they're basically he incorporated the rule into web page test tool. The idea is simple. It increases the quality of displayed image as image being downloaded. So it kind of goes in through layers of rendering, right? Image first 100 bytes will give you some picture, second 100 will give you better picture, and so on and so on. I might be exaggerating about 100 bytes. It's actually, there is some moment when it starts to render, but think of progressive JPEGs. You might want to consider it against it if quality of picture right away is more important than progress. I would probably test for that. I guess for people who are very passionate about the quality, especially your designers or product people in your team, might kind of not like that. So you don't want to just show them shitty image first, right? And then better image. You probably want to show them numbers, how it improves sales, and that convince them that way, right? So again, adjusting to bandwidth or responding to bandwidth is a complicating stuff. So progressive JPEG will probably get you much farther than you want to go ever with this approach. Okay, so let's quickly talk about integration. How can you add responsive images to your site? And there are, I kind of identified these three approaches through which you can go depending on your business. First one is a CMS workflow. Works pretty well for content site, right? Where all the images are provided by your team. And the key points there is to edit the image, let users edit, especially applies when you're talking about art direction case, right? Without this step, it's kind of hard to get the source data in. Then you optimize it and then you deploy it. And let's not forget CDNs where you want to deploy your images, and it's kind of important process. So I hope you all read all the details on that slide, so I had another one. Just to summarize the process, that's what we built at truTV. We have the deployment process that uploads our images to server, to initial server, actually to all servers, but it also triggers this optimization process, which basically first detects if image needs to be processed, whatever it's an image or not, JPEG. It basically picks all the JPEGs and then in a synchronous fashion runs the Gearman jobs to do optimization. We run Jpeg Mini to create. In our case, we kind of first step in our process in this project, I should say, is we just create 4 versions of an image: 100% uploaded size, 75, 50, 25%, right? But with automated quality setting picked by Jpeg Mini. And we use the closest image in production, right, in real time. It works pretty well, but obviously it's not the most optimal approach. The best approach is to use the image that fits exactly the screen, right? Like, it doesn't need to be resized in the browser. It just transfers the bytes. But there are quite a lot of devices out there. Pre-creating them using this method is probably not realistic, right? So you cannot really pre-create every variation in advance. That's why automation comes in. One type of automation is front-end optimization, right? Tools like we mentioned Akamai in the past. I don't know how InStartLogic approaches this particular problem, but there is Mod PageSpeed, is an open source version of front-end optimization solution, I should say, by Google. By the way, there is a version for Nginx now. Joshua Moran's presented here actually about a year ago by now, about Mod PageSpeed. It's a pretty impressive piece of technology and has all of those optimizations encoded as filters within the product. It obviously does much more. And essentially it rewrites your HTML on the fly and recompresses your images on the fly and replaces one with another. It's not doing it in line, actually, because as I said, optimization takes time, whatever it's automated or like offline. But generally, it's a complicated system where they first monitor the traffic, what is needed, and then create stuff in parallel. So it's a all of these solutions are pretty complicated in that sense. Good news, you just flip the switch and it supposedly works, right? Um, so, and there are many other switches as well, like JavaScript related stuff and things like that. So you might want to look at that if you have user generated content, right? If you have automatable stuff like not art direction, just scaling. If you want to transcode based on a format that browser supports, that's one kind of a disadvantage because that server, this Nginx or Apache server that you have this module installed, has to actually answer browser traffic. You cannot be behind the proxy for this, right? That's one of the challenges. Although for commercial services like Akamai, they play on that because they provide both to you. But these will optimize on the fly, detect which browser, and give it exactly the format you want to get. I actually don't know about Jpeg XR support in Google's product, considering Microsoft being a competitor and just bad feeling there, but hopefully they will support that too. So automation on the server side is something you might want to look at if workflow, like just editorial workflow, is not something that will cover all your use cases. Another type of automation is real-time image resizing services like Sencha, SRC. There is another one called Liquid Pixels, but also there is open source tool called Adaptive Images. Basically, in the URL of your, when you call an image, you just provide the size you need, and it resizes it on the fly. You can do it hard-coded on your end, and most of those provide actually some JavaScript for you to rewrite your images into these URLs, right? So essentially, you are not rewriting your HTML, but your images get rewritten on the fly, and you only make one request for that image. Well, frankly, make sure that JavaScript actually does that before you do implement it. But there is some ground for this. I think the approach is called fluid images, although I thought it's actually more generic term. Yeah, so this is another way to automate it without relying on the full server implementation that rewrites all your HTML and does much heavier changes to your core product, core pages, right? So those are general approaches to integration. That's primarily about what do you do with actual images. But there is another component to it. It's what do you put on your pages to call those images. One of the challenges with some of those standards around it, as well as just first implementations that attempted to swap the images on the fly, or some tricks and things that people tried to implement, like using some conditional comments and this and that, is that all images still get downloaded. The most famous one is Apple releasing their Retina site for the first iPad, actually downloaded both the regular size and the Retina size for all of the devices, whatever you are Retina or not. It just displayed the better one, right? Kind of defeats the purpose for performance reasons. Well, again, if you're on Wi-Fi, showing it to your boss still works, but we usually care about our users and key performance metrics, or sales, I should say, metrics that this affects. So the trouble is that there is no standard yet. If you follow the drama, there is this fight between, well, actually, I think the fight is kind of won, or maybe kind of people stopped being passionate about this fight. It's just going on, and people kill each other one way or another. Between picture tag and source tag, I'm not going to go into detail about it. I think Jason Grigsby, in his responsive images article, put it the best way. That one rule that, in addition to guidelines, was whatever you implement today will change, right? So it will be deprecated. Whatever method you do will be deprecated. That's why I put that PHP call up there. Implement it that way. Abstract actual HTML that writes out an image using whatever your flavor of the language for HTML generation is, because it might change quite dramatically. If you saw syntax for picture tag versus source set tag, they're nothing in common. And current JavaScript implementation that's called gel wrote to polyfill picture tag, it's called picture fill, requires you to write that verbose set of divs and media queries and stuff like that to operate. That's what we use right now. It works very well, right? But again, it might be deprecated pretty soon, right? The standardization bodies, or standardizers, I should say, will decide on one thing and so will stick with it, and you cannot fight the person who writes C++ to create a browser, right? It's there. Alternative cannot get there quite forever. Browsers definitely dragging their feet. So abstract it away. Maybe if your case is more complicated, where you really need to bring different images based on much more complicated rules than just layout size, maybe your PHP or whatever template call will be more complicated. You need to push more data from your CMS to this logic engine that picks the right image. But in our case, this sufficed. Just some logic into picking that was enough. Yes, Kai? No, I cannot really zoom into it. It wasn't the point of the slide. I think if you just check this URL over, that's probably the best thing for you to check. Actually, there should be a picture fill at the end of that URL, but the Scott Gels picture fill. If you type in picture fill in Google, it will get you all you need. But essentially, it's a section of divs and script tags that kind of defines which image to show for which media query and things like that. Right? The fight is partially between the source set and picture fill is the expressiveness of the format and brevity of the syntax and all of that. I'll wait while that fight is over. It will take a while, right? We have the picture fill. It works. It adds a little bit to your HTML, but don't forget to gzip your HTML. Just not related to images, but just don't forget. And that will kind of resolve most of these problems with this solution, right? So this works. It works right now. Yeah, sorry, you kind of lost me one thought. One important piece of the implementation you want to do is your front-end code that writes out that PHP tag should make sure that those optimized images are ready to be consumed, right? That they actually were processed and uploaded to CDN by the time you generate the call to particular image, right? Our code actually falls back to the source image until it sees that all images were processed and ready to be shown to the users. So this is a relatively straightforward implementation. That took a lot of time to piece all of the things together, especially asynchronous processing and things like that. And it's I don't know why I said it's relatively straightforward, but knowing these components will probably get you 60-70% in. The rest is just a little bit of elbow grease with all your favorite server-side logic and your CMS or whatever process you have around content in your business. I believe you can kind of automate, have generic solution for most popular CMSs or something, but I cannot really provide universal advice. I think that's as much as I can go. So that's it kind of about what to do. You just need to make it happen. I hope I convinced you so far that it's important. Frankly, I didn't provide enough magic because there's no magic there. Just make images fit the size of the screen you have. With automated tools like mod page speed, you can fit exactly, but there are some drawbacks. With more manual processes, it's or more not manual, but less automated processes that don't see the client directly, but pre-create stuff in advance, you can have the subset of images pretty manageable. It will not fit exactly, but it will work well. So that's about it, except that I wanted to show you the results of how effective it was for us. So unfortunately, this screen is not very, so you can look at the side for numbers. Actually, the numbers are pretty clear. The left column is small format. It's some 3 key breakpoints on our website: small, medium, and large. Surprise, surprise. I can talk forever about how to organize the process for responsiveness in your company, where these namings are quite important. But small, medium, and large. So our homepage on the site in a small format is just 400K, while Retina MacBook, it's 1.5 megs, right? If we were serving that phone with this 1.5 meg version of the site, it will take much longer to load. Simple as that. It's a little bit misleading. It cannot be just attributed to the image optimization because, frankly, we are just not showing some of those images in that lower format, right? But if we didn't implement picture fill and didn't implement, didn't approach it properly, we would still just hide those images using CSS, but still download them all over the wire, right? Now, this is quite impressive. It's what, 3.5 times difference? That's pretty important to do this. Again, wireless networks is just nothing in comparison to your wired networks for desktops. Even Wi-Fi, your local Wi-Fi is very different from your cell service, especially if you are in developing countries when they don't have LTE in full power right next to you, right? So this is very important. But more importantly, the number on the right is the source images that were uploaded. So if we didn't do optimization of the images, we would have a 4 meg homepage, even in a larger screen, right? And when I was talking about the importance of recompressions of your source files with JPEG quality and stuff like that, most of this win comes actually from there. So Photoshops, automated image screenshotting tools, or whatever, they don't care about performance. They provide rich image experience. And designers will never optimize your image to the quality you need. You really need to run optimization automatically. And that's the win that you can get. Tenfold win from the phone to the source image. If we didn't have this project, we would have 4 meg pages. Just simple like that. One funny fact, I mentioned that responsive design took it by fire. Like basically filled the market. Every marketer, if they didn't hear about responsive design, they're late already. And definitely going to be pushing for it because it's the easiest way to occupy mobile space for them, right? Good news is that somehow it's very visual. They do see large monitor and small phone. They probably had a lot of experience with relatively bad wireless connection to actually feel the problem by heart. All of the evangelism that we did in the past before this moment about performance didn't have as great of effect as just explaining this problem. We were obviously not given enough time to build this system. I mean, no technology feature comes in for like with enough time, but it was required of us to build this feature, right? So this was a natural fit for performance project. So if you're sitting on something and want to speed up the site, you have this burning feeling you just love web performance optimization, right? This is approach that you can take. It's a little bit political question, but it wins marketing hearts. You still need to explain it about 15 times, but at least this is much more obvious when you compare. Where's the closest screen? Well, this is the closest screen. This screen and that screen, right? even if it's not that screen, the iPad and phone and desktop and phone are so tactile experience where you hold this phone and it's just small and personal, and network is just so shitty that you really feel that it will be slow if these geeks don't turn the magical optimizer in, right? So it's one way to win this project over. Um, you can tell I'm very passionate about this, making this kind of stuff happen, and this was a surprising win for me. So uh, that's it about the topic. This is my information. Uh, I can open to question now. Yes, Max.
Is it possible to somehow actually, with progressive JPEG downloads, is it possible to somehow abort download once the page is ready? So that image downloads in parallel with the rest of the page. So then once page is complete, it kind of like cuts off and aborts the rest of the image.
It's a very good question. I have no clue, but I guess you could. I think you can cancel connections and can cancel downloads, whatever is progressive enough. But it's a very good question. What's your use case?
Just some really big, pretty picture that takes a long time to download.
But it's so important. That's why it's on that page.
It's good enough.
Yeah. No, I know what you're talking about. So it's I don't know. I literally don't know. I know it wasn't a lot of technology inside, so uh, there's not much to have questions about. Any other? Yes. Yeah. Yes. No. I've been there from the beginning to the end. Yes.
Either.
I can repeat the question. No problem.
Okay, sure. What was the greatest obstacle?
Well, we're talking about responsive images tonight, so I can limit to that. Um, um, so the question was, what was the biggest challenge in this truTV project, whatever it was, technical or political or business process-wise. So in terms of responsive images, as I said, we actually had a good business win, right? Much more clear to business. I can only explain it with this feeling thing, right? In terms of technology, well, I guess we put a lot of effort in advance into the project, so I think it went relatively smoothly. So I cannot really find this problem. Now, if we talk about responsive redesign, we can probably spend a couple years discussing that. It is a challenge, so don't get it take it lightly when you go into responsive redesign project, especially if it's so massive as truTV was, where we redid the site. We're still working on it, by the way. It's been a year by now, but it's not an easy process and not an easy answer to make in 5 minutes. Sorry. Yes. Well, the question was how big of a role does CDN play, and when do you know when it's time to utilize that? Well, let's talk about general use case of regular CDN, right? Like not other bells and whistles like Akamai provides FEO and other things, right? CDN's goal is to bring your assets as close to the end user as possible, right? Because download time, page load time depends not as much on bandwidth as on latency, right? And latency, unfortunately, unlike bandwidth, is a very hard thing to fight. We can probably do 10% improvement in base technology ever, right? Unless we figure out like space travel or something like that, like real complicated stuff like teleportation or something. So to beat the latency, you just move stuff closer to the user. Now, when does it matter? As long as you have a user that is away from your server. I know it's kind of generic answer, so it might apply on the first day, and it does apply on the first day, frankly. So the moment that you have users that are for whom going to the closest CDN node is closer than to your server, it makes sense. And it can apply to international business, obviously, right? So China, America, it's pretty far in terms of well, geography too, but also like routing latency over existing channels path. But even within the US, East Coast, West Coast are pretty far, right? So it plays big role. We are not talking about it today because it doesn't really add anything specific to responsive design, but or responsiveness of images. But it is definitely a best practice to use CDN. There is a site called cdnplanet.com that Aaron Peters and Sajal Kayan maintain, talking about different features of CDNs, actual support within different CDNs, kind of independent review of CDNs. You can check them out. It is not cheap generally, but well, your users bring you money, hopefully. So, yeah, Mike. Well, to make the test like that, unfortunately, you need pretty sophisticated analytics tools too. By the way, the question was, what's the difference between mobile users versus desktop users when you, in particular, when you implement responsive design, right? So to run a very good test, you really need good metric system in place to achieve that, right? And we actually have a harder time to convince business to implement that than responsive images, right? So I cannot really say that we had measurements done to distinguish the two, right? What was clear to business is that we didn't need to measure it to implement responsive images. It was obvious, right? And frankly, it was obvious. Testing over our synthetic testing that we used to do this kind of test showed definite difference, right? So, by the way, easy to test. You just do responsive and non-responsive. You especially if you are particularly responding to the size of the screen, which is most of the cases, right? You just constrain. If you use web page test, you just instruct it to resize its window or viewport to a particular size. There is some scripting tooling like that, and you compare the results, right? I mean, again, not real user measurement, right? Not wireless networking, not phones, right? So you are not getting real outcome. But the picture is pretty clear. This performance improvement brings results. Again, you should measure to get real numbers. Especially, by the way, you should measure business outcome and not milliseconds or anything, right? Did those people actually buy your product on the phone? Did it actually help? Considering you are selling the product. Mm-hmm. What kind of rule? So the question is, we picked particular set of breakpoints on our side between small, medium, and large. And in reality, it's a little bit more breakpoints because of orientation change and things like that. And so the question is, how do we decide where to break, right? Or when do we change from one view to another? And this is partially political question that we probably need to talk about when we discuss responsive design in general. How do you bring responsiveness into your product team and designer team? They're not as ready as we are, funny enough, to make this shift. So how do you decide is a bigger question. But generally, the approach is when it starts to look bad, create a breakpoint and change the layout, right? That's probably the best approach. Start usually from the mobile first. That's kind of known best practice, and go higher, right? In terms of image sizes, we picked a simple method. Depending on the screen's resolution, the closer it is to breakpoint, sorry, when it reaches a breakpoint, use the next version of an image. Again, we picked 25, 50, 75, and 100% pixel size, right? And just switch between the four. It's worth mentioning that in that first slide that showed Tim Kadlik's article, he talks about the tool by Yoav Wise called Sizer Suzy, I think, if I pronounce it correctly. What it does, it analyzes your page for what are actual sizes that you get, right? It renders it using PhantomJS and all the, actually, I think Tim did only a couple resolutions, but you can advance it to all the image sizes, screen sizes you get, resize your website to that size, measure how big are the resulting images would be, calculate the effect, and all of that, right? That would be a most scientific research for the most advanced implementation, right? Advanced implementations take more time to implement, and it's just plain harder to achieve that level of quality in the process, right? But potentially you can analyze this. So I actually thought about merging that tool with the statistics of the website, where you just grab it from real-time statistics of your site, right, and kind of produce the results. But it just takes time to produce that kind of data. We might look into it in the future. There is another gotcha there in terms of responsive images. It's not like you just resizing the site to be smaller, right? That's kind of the whole point of responsive design. In some layouts, image can occupy different amount of space, a different portion of the space, right? Maybe on a large screen. Actually, on our maybe I should just actually, our homepage is a good example of that, right? As you can see, desktop and laptop or kind of have the similar experience, but tablet and phone have a very different proportion. By the way, it's also JavaScript differences ginormous. One is carousel, another one is accordion, and things like that, right? But again, that aside, that blue image takes almost 100% width on the phone, while it's less than that, about a quarter, a little more than that, on the desktop, right? So the gotcha is you cannot really completely rely on the screen size only. So in perfect scenario, you want to calculate what your CSS rules do in particular breakpoint, right? Start small, perfect later. That's what we are doing, actually. Yes, in the back. Sorry. Well, actually, you can. I would say, I would add to that you could probably, if you can attribute the win to performance in particular, and RAM is one way to do that, but there's even with RAM, you still need to do A/B testing for that to kind of specifically detect. Well, with RAM, there are other ways to see the differences, right? The effect of it, but you need to measure business metrics, and for business metric measurement, you do need A/B testing. So basically, release percentage of your traffic to a more optimized, more optimized version to percentage of your traffic, and compare the results. The trouble is attributing it to specifically to performance, because, well, yeah, I agree. Again, basically measure business metrics and compare the results. Timing is important, but for us geeks more than for business people. Yes. Yeah, well, the question is, how do we determine which size we'll get depending on reading or not reading? Well, we actually don't care about density much. We just pure pixel size, based on pixel size. In our case, again, we went a simplified route based on the pixel size of the whole screen, kind of matching our general layout rules, our general breakpoints. It was the easiest to implement. We go and switch. Yeah. So, I'm sorry? On the Retina, on the highest resolution, we show it at 100%. Yeah, you wanna source images to be the highest quality you can get, but it can be on my desktop it's 75 for these particular 4 images, for example. Again, the approach, how you want to simplify that, or how you want to match the correct size to the destination device can be different. Again, with automation, you can be much more precise, right? With those services that I mentioned, not necessarily mod page speed kind of optimization, but just image services. It can be detected on the fly, right? And particular image will be requested on the fly, but uh, you can get a pretty big win, as you saw with the numbers, by going the simple route first. Okay, I'll be happy to answer more questions later on. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you for coming.